For all you geniuses out there, Columbus Day had nothing to do with Christopher Columbus. It had to do with the Italian culture. Benjamin Harrison had a huge problem on his hands, and it came from the Big Easy, the city of New Orleans. Italians in New Orleans were lynched, and Italy was threatening to go to war. The most massive lynchings ever in America happened in New Orleans. Was it the KKK lynching Italians? No, it was some of the most prominent citizens in the city, including future governors and mayors. In 1891, a popular police chief was finished with his shift and he was walking home to end his day. He didn't think that would be the last day he would walk home. The police chief's name was Hennessy. He was shot by a man, and as he was dying, he made a statement that the man who shot him was, well, let's just say he used a derogatory word for Italians, the D word. He said, the D word got me. But Hennessy didn't recognize the assailant. New Orleans at this time had a population of Italians of about 200,000. It's really hard to be precise with that. The Italians were looked down upon because their skin was a little darker and they were Catholic. And they were mostly from Sicily. And of course, if you're from Sicily, you must be a criminal. There were two major groups of Italians in town, and they were kind of going at each other. Hennessy was scheduled to testify against one of those groups in 2 days, which is why they think he was shot. They didn't want him to testify. After Hennessy died, the police rounded up hundreds of Italians. Local newspapers were fanning the fuel of hatred, as the media does today. The city was in a fury. No Italian felt safe in the city. Some even just stayed in their homes. Most of the suspects were let go, but 45 were arrested and 19 were charged. The first 9 were put on trial. 6 of them were found not guilty. In addition, 3 others ended in a mistrial. The jurors couldn't agree on a verdict. People didn't believe it. In fact, they knew that the mafia was somehow involved. There would be no justice coming from the legal system. So some of the top people put an ad in the newspapers to have a meeting at the statue of Henry Clay. Now, what you need to know is that almost every time the citizens had a meeting at the statue of Henry Clay, it would end up in violence. The speaker stirred everyone up, and they shouted, "When courts fail, the citizens must act." They broke into the city's arsenal, grabbing guns and ammunition, and then they stormed the jail. The guards had let the prisoners out of the cell so that they could try to hide somewhere. They also grabbed, besides for going after the guys that they thought might be involved in it, they grabbed a few other Italians too. Some were hung, some were shot 10, 12. One guy was even shot 41 times. Even one of them who were mentally ill was shot. Some were hung after they were shot. Some were dismembered for souvenirs. Some Italians were clubbed to death. Some left hanging for hours. Now, keep in mind, these people were found innocent, and many of these people weren't even involved in it. In fact, we don't know if any of them were involved in it. Some were merely fruit peddlers and street vendors. Now, a couple of them did actually have criminal records. No one across the nation really condemned the incident. Even the New York Times seemed to support the action. Where the president would come in, Benjamin Harris, is the problem was some of these were actually Italian citizens that they rounded up. The Italian government went ballistic. They were talking about going to war and that they were going to block the entrance to the Mississippi, which is how we got a lot of our products. If they did that, we'd have been an economic disaster. Then they recalled their ambassador and we recalled ours. Plus, at this time, you got to remember America was weak. The Civil War was over, Reconstruction was winding down, so we had let our military, pretty much go down to nothing. None of the vigilantes were punished. Of course, nobody could recognize anybody. That was not unusual back then. To bring the temperature down, Benjamin Harris agreed to pay the relatives $25,000, a little over $2,000 for each family. Later, others were also given compensation. To further ease the tension, he called for a celebration of the Italian culture in 1892. The celebration was meant to be a one-time thing, and they did it on the day 400 years after the Italian explorer, landed in America. But the whole purpose of it was just a one-time event to celebrate Italian culture and to try to reduce the tensions with Italy. The day was celebrated by the Italians in New York in 1866, but it was a cultural event. It had nothing to do with Columbus. Later, in 1937, FDR would make it a day of proclamation, but it wasn't a national holiday. Of course, he didn't mention that he had put, many Italians in prison camps during World War II. LBJ made it a federal holiday in 1968, and it was to take effect in 1971. It is what we now celebrate as Columbus Day. All that because of a lynching in New Orleans. That's how our national holiday, Columbus Day, actually became Columbus Day. And it was not to celebrate Columbus, it was to celebrate the Italians. Of course, many states have now reversed this, and many states call it Indigenous Peoples Day instead, without knowing what the day was all about. Actually, most of the politicians do know. They just want to play their little virtue signaling games. And I'd like to ask you, where did the indigenous people get their land from? Most of them have taken it from other indigenous people. They conquered the land. That's how they built their nations. If you like these videos, it's a new channel, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for listening.